Hey guys, welcome to this recording on storyboarding basics. My name is Darren Christian. A little bit about me: I've been working in the industry, the film industry, that is, for about 12 to 13 years now. Started out as a prop designer, then got into storyboarding as well as production painting. So, yeah, I'm gonna try and share the knowledge I have with you as best as I can. It's a little bit informal. You have to excuse the dogs barking in the background. So I'm yeah, hoping to get some clarity on my process and my methods and some of the things I've learned over time. So without further ado, let's get stuck right into it. So I'm going to start with the basics of storyboarding, and I guess the question is, what is storyboarding? And effectively, storyboarding is a way to visualize what's going to happen on screen for filmmakers, and basically packaged into little panels, showing the sequential panels or the sequential frames of what's going to take place in a film. Um, and obviously, we do that through drawing, and eventually, the director will take those boards and have them realized in reality. But this all starts with panel drawing and visualization. So it's a majorly beneficial technique for everyone involved. Everyone gets to be on the same page of what's to go in front of the camera. And the operative word here is camera. So this is our lens, literally our lens that we're looking through. And this is how we're going to see the film or see the photography that we're capturing and the sequences that take place within the film. So, what are the fundamentals to understand before going in? I think the first thing to know is that a lot of people think storyboarding is about drawing. And yes, drawing is a fundamental skill, and you have to have that. And you can't really do it without it. But more importantly, is understanding how to frame and what makes a good frame and where do we start, what is the arrangement, what motivates the frame, all those kind of questions. As far as drawing is concerned, I would suggest that you keep practicing by observation, looking at things in your house, looking at things outside, sketching, keeping a sketchbook with you, and keeping that muscle strong. But in this particular tutorial, I'm not going to take you through much of drawing technical things or technical sort of aspects of drawing at all, but I will be focusing on the camera, how to use it, what's expected, how to frame, how to arrange, and perhaps in the future we can do something that focuses more on actual drawing techniques. So without further ado, here we go. So storyboarding basics. I'm going to run you through a couple of things: camera angles, lens choices, lighting, visual design, fundamentals, and composition. Then I'll go into your assignments, which should get you um, into sort of a practical space where you can actually put some of these methods I've taught you into practice, and hopefully by the end of it you'll feel a bit more confident going into storyboarding. Okay, so without further ado, let's start. I'm just going to open my lessons and I'll be with you in a second. So our first lesson here is going to be on camera angles, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, while explaining, bring in an image that's an example of a particular angle. So effectively, there's only really three angles that you could look at in storyboarding, and one would be a high angle. So I'm going to pull that into Photoshop and show you. Let me just zoom in on that. So here we have a high angle of Harrison Ford in Blade Runner, and he is hanging on this edge of the building. So what is the motivation behind a high angle? Generally, we're looking at the subject from quite a high point of view. And what that does is it makes the subject feel small and makes the subject feel vulnerable. In this particular case, it was definitely to promote vulnerability because we can see he's in a precarious position and he's in grave danger. Um, So here we really sort of amplifying, using that high angle sort of amplifies his vulnerability. We feel powerful, sort of dominating the space, like hovering over him, whereas he's like the smaller guy that's in a space, in a dangerous sort of position. And more often than not, a high angle is there to motivate that narrative. Okay, let's pop into the next one. So here we have, which is just a medium angle, um, or eye level framing, which is basically very standard, very normal, and that kind of brings us into the shot because in reality, when we're looking at people, we're looking from this point of view. So it feels like we're actually there and we're taking part in the scene. So that's generally the motivation behind a normal sort of natural framing, and it is a very natural way to see the world. So we're not really trying to emphasize anything. We're just trying to be part of the scene. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is a low angle. So here we have Mr. Gosling, and more often than not, this shooting from below makes the person in the frame feel very powerful and very dominant. And that's the sort of psychological impact you get there. You know, that you feel he's sort of hovering, towering over you, this like larger than life figure, and often that would be the motivation behind the low angle. So yeah, so that's covering angles. Obviously, if you wanna revise, you can always go back and listen to it again. I know it's quite fast, but because the video is short, I'm gonna try and move through them relatively quickly. So bear with me. So now let's go to the next one, which is one second. So now we're looking at lens choices. So I'm just gonna bring up lens choices. So when it comes to lens choices, we're generally looking at a medium lens, a wide lens, or a telephoto. So again, for some bizarre reason, a lot of the voodoo of filmmaking takes place in threes. So again, we're looking at three different lenses. So we have wide, we have medium, which is our natural sort of eye view, and we have telephoto, which is a long lens, which kind of almost shortens the depth of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first start with a wide shot from Blade Runner again. So here we go. We have a wide, very wide view. And often what a wide angle view does, what a wide lens does, it tends to warp the image slightly. It's exaggerated a little bit. And let me just show you what I mean. You can see in these areas here, it looks almost a little bit stretched out. But it does give it a nice feeling of drama when it's exaggerated that way, and it gives us a better sense of space, and it also pulls in more information to the frame. We get to see more, which is always exciting. So often the wide is about sort of covering more of the space that we're looking at. In addition to that, a wide lens is often deliberately put there to exaggerate proportions and it's make it sometimes look a bit more, depending on what the genre of the film is, make it look a bit more cartoony or distorted, or just exaggerated to get more of a dynamic feel or dynamism. So that would generally be the motivation between for wide lenses. And so let me bring in a sort of medium shot. So here again we have a medium shot, which I did talk about a little bit earlier on. And yeah, this is just your standard point of view. Again, here it feels like we could be sitting on his shoulder. We kind of looking over his shoulder, and we feel quite immersed in the world. There's still, as you can see, it's medium, so there's still some depth. Pretty much as far as your eye would see. So we're not really shortening the distance too much. And yeah, it's not much more to say about a medium lens, except that it acts as almost a simulation of our eye. Then here we go with the with the telephoto, and this one again is the long lens, which kind of often makes the characters feel quite sort of big and quite larger than life in a way, and they're sort of like in your face, and then it kind of shortens the distance in the background as well, so everything feels quite close and intimate. And I think that's generally the motivation behind the long lens, is to have that sort of intimate feeling of being right there, right sort of stuck there in the scene, and characters also feeling quite sort of powerful in the scene. Okay, cool. So that's it for lenses, and let's move on to tell you right now. Let's move on to lighting. Alrighty, so when it comes to lighting, very simple. There's pretty much two kinds of lighting situations, and one would be ambient light and the other directional. So when it comes to ambient light, I'm going to pop this one. This is an example of ambient light where everything is kind of diffused and neutral, and effectively what we're saying is there is no direct source of light coming from the sun or an artificial light source. There's just general light all around us, hence the word ambient. So it's a soft, neutral light that sort of immerses us all over, but there's no hard cast shadows or, hot spots, because there's no directional light shining anywhere. In contrast to that, we have the directional light, which is, just one second. So here we have an example of directional light. So this is a pretty nice example, because obviously the light in this particular instance is coming from the window outside, and we can see it shining, creating a really hot area on Rachel's face over there. And we can even see some of the ambient occlusion on the chin there. But yeah, this is a great example of high contrast directional light, because we can see on this side there is actually almost completely shrouded in shadow, so there's no light source there. But on this side, it's coming through the window and hitting this plane of a face quite intensely and creating a nice hot spot. And we'll get into contrast a bit later on, and highest points of contrast and how they can control your eye and bring you into the image a bit more. Okay, cool. So let me close these guys. So let's move on to the next one. So right now we're going to move on into visual design fundamentals, and here I'm going to focus on how we can arrange things in our shot to look cool, where we can place the camera, and basically what motivates good cinematic framing and creates a good storyboard. So without further ado, let's jump into that, and I'm going to pull up a couple of laws of which I often use. There are more, and you could do your research and go on your own account and find out what other devices there are that can really help you create a pretty frame or a aesthetically pleasing frame. But these are a few that I use, and these are sort of the fundamentals, and a lot of the great directors will use this. Ridley Scott, Kurosawa. These are all techniques, and even painters. This applies to painting as well. These techniques actually, a lot of the early cinematographers segued from painting degrees or painting qualification into photography. So the same laws are applicable to creating good paintings, are applicable to good cinematic photography, and it's basically visual design, how our brain responds, what makes our brain respond, how do we control the eye, how do we get into a position where we can puppeteer the viewer or the audience to create the impact or the emotional impact that we intend to create. So here we have a couple of laws, and the first one would be repetition. As I name them, I'm going to pull in an example of that particular law. to show how it's executed in the frame. So without further ado, here we go. Alrighty, so here we have a great example of repetition. And as you can see, when I say repetition, I mean things repeating, obviously. And some people like to refer to it as echoing shapes. It depends on how you want to refer to it. But I like the idea of echoing shapes because there's something in our brain that finds it very pleasing to see the same shape repeated. It's just like an aesthetically pleasing visual, and it also gives you a stronger sense of depth because, as you can see, these little light slots are actually obviously the same size, and as they go off into the distance, um, they get smaller. But what it does is it amplifies the depth. It gives us it almost underlines and defines the distance, and then it also just gives us a really aesthetically pleasing image with that repetition. And then we can see how that light's coming through and that same pattern is repeated here again. And I'm not exactly sure on the science of why things being repeated are are so appealing to our eye, and I should probably do my research on that. But I would say that it's also almost like a puzzle piece. Our brains can make sense of it very easily, and it fits, and there's a rhythm to it, and there's a pattern to it, and it becomes sort of a melody in a way, a very pleasing thing to look at. So that's a really strong example of repetition and how Roger Deakins used it there. So let's close this one, say no, and let's go to Symmetry. And Symmetry is it's a pretty straightforward one. Is how do we create an image that's appealing by using symmetry? And this one is obviously, to explain what symmetry is, it's balancing everything in a shot and making it all even and nicely balanced and harmonious, as opposed to asymmetrical, which is also a technique that is used deliberately, but in this particular one, it's symmetrical. And a great sort of director who implemented that quite a lot was Stanley Kubrick. I would say The Shining would be a good example of using symmetry for almost every shot he locks off. We have our main character here dead in the center of the image, and that already gives us a sense of symmetry. We have a balanced line coming through there, which matches that line there. Same thing is happening with the perspective line here, and the same perspective line here. So these triangles start matching each other, these triangles start matching each other, and just from a visual perspective, that all that kind of echoing shapes and that symmetrical fundamental shapes are creating a really pleasing image in our heads. Our brains can make sense of it. We know where to look, we know what to feel, and yeah, really great. Another example here would also be the of repetition, would be these bodies being repeated and these cubes being repeated. So often, they bleed into each other. Symmetry and repetition and all these laws tend to bleed into each other. And more often than not, you'll find that at least three or more are used in in at least three or more are used in the same shot. So yeah, very interesting stuff. So yep, without further ado, let's move on to the next. Okay, so here we go. Next one we have is creating depth. How do we create depth? Okay, so first thing, I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to bring in this guy over here, and here we go. So here's a nice example of how Roger Deakins once again has used depth. And as you can see, if you look at the shot, it's not where those trucks are actually not that far away, or where those bikes or people are walking are not. It's not that far away, but with the softening and the atmosphere and the particles and the fog and all these things that are added into the frame, that kind of sfumata, smoky, hazy effect is actually uh, giving us the impression or creating the illusion that that these trucks and these people are further away. So this is the area I'm referring to. So as you can see, these things, I can't really estimate what the distance may be, but the softening and the particles and the fog creates that distance and gives us a strong sense of depth again, which is always pleasing to look at. Same thing is applying to the buildings in the back. What's also nice about that kind of foggy smokiness is that we tend to disguise some of the details, and obviously these are all, I mean, these are either sets or CGI. And what's nice about disguising details is that it can immerse us in it. It can make it feel a little bit more real because we're not exposing everything. We're kind of implying things. And as a filmmaker, or as someone who appreciates film, I tend to feel that implied design is always better than just sort of things that are just in your face, because it gives the viewer a chance to imagine and a chance to um, conjure his own thoughts of what may be there, or her own thoughts of what may be there. And I always think that's a much more exciting way to design and to make films. So often in storyboards, just by softening the background, you can create a much better sense of depth in your images. Cool. So let's move on to the next one. Say no. Okay, next one. Framing, balance, and symmetry. Okay, cool. So, this one, I kind of touched on it already in symmetry, and I think it also falls into the rule of thirds. So let's pull up an image that kind of encompasses a couple of those rules. Let's pull out a few, or extrapolate a few techniques being used in one shot. So I'm going to pull this in. And so, okay, so symmetry, balance, and rule of thirds. How do we identify? Okay, what is the rule of thirds firstly? So rule of thirds is basically dividing up your image into thirds. And that's a technique often used by most cinematographers. And for some reason, it's a nice way of arranging and compiling your image. So let's see how it takes effect in this one. So over here, you can see it's not always exactly accurate, but it's thereabouts. So let's say there's a third of this frame here, there's a third of this frame here, there's a third of this frame here, and there's a third over here. So as we can see, there's a nice chunky shape in this third. There's a nice chunky shape in that third. Over here, these thirds aren't really being occupied, but we can see by creating that here, we isolating this in its own space, and our eye is going straight into that area over there. So what also is interesting is how this contrasts against the space that's underneath it, because there's no other object or anything that's obscuring that. So it's creating a clear iconic image of this particular hero vehicle over here. So we can see how the rule of thirds is implemented here, and often in frames, as they intersect, there will always be something that piques our interest in frames. So let's pull up another example of rule of thirds. So I'm going to pull up the old frame we had in earlier, and again, let's see how it works here. So there we go. There we got nice chunky design there. Not too much going on in this area. And this third of the frame, we also have some objects in there as well. So that's one way. Again, we see symmetry being used, which I explained earlier. And I think let's move on to direction. So I'm going to pull in the same frames from earlier and move on to directional lines. So this is, what is directional lines? It's things in the shot that pull our eye into where the director wants us to look. So again, with this shot, we see how these are lines of direction flowing here. These are lines of direction flowing here. And they're pointing virtually to our subjects who are the center of the story right here. So, you know, the composer or the cinematographer is telling us where to look without overtly telling us, you know, by subtly arranging things in a way, naturally our eye is going to gravitate to where the center of the story is going on. So it wants us to look. It wants us to look here. It wants us to look here. If you see it as arrows, these directions, again, we have more directional lines coming down here, which is also pointing to our subject. So all of those are pointing to our central area, which is this is a really great example of using directional lines to pull us into the center of our story. Okay, cool. So it's a good example of that. And again, I spoke about it a bit earlier, which was the highest point of contrast. And here we can see, and the highest point of contrast is effectively where the lowest light meets, or the darkest light meets the lightest light. So where is that happening here? That's happening in this area. So that's exactly where your eye is going to go. Because of contrast, it allows that particular area, or it motivates that area to pop. And as soon as there's a pop there, that's where our eye is going to look. Let's see if there's another example of that in some of the previous frames I was looking at. So 1 second, I'll be right with you. For example, Rachel, which I pulled up earlier, the highest point of contrast here would be in that area of her face, which is the hottest meets the darkest. And that's exactly where our eyes can, that is the nature of our brains to gravitate towards the most contrasted area. So that's often a great technique that's implemented to tell us where to look. And you know, in the end of the day, it's actually pretty logical stuff. It's just things that we overlook if we're not sort of cognizant of it. So yeah, those let's see where we at. So yeah, I think that covers most of the fundamental laws. I'm gonna try and speed through a little bit more because I think we are on about 30 minutes already, and I think this video is gonna push to about an hour. So let's go to the next part of it, which is doing a little bit of actual exercise to start implementing some of these rules. So the first thing I'm going to ask of you guys is to choose 10 film frames of your choice and identify the compositional laws and angles and lens choices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example of taking a frame in and breaking down all those elements. I'm actually just going to quickly find a cool frame to work on, which I haven't worked on before. So I'm going to be breaking it down as I go along and see what techniques were implemented. So let's see, what can I choose? Always loved Blade Runner. So I think let's stick in the theme of Blade Runner and see if we can find a nice image that that will sort of give us some idea of some of the framing techniques. So it's getting overwhelmed with all these cool shots. Okay, let's not take too long. Okay, so I think because this is a little bit too overwhelming, let's go back to one of our existing frames and let's pull in okay, so I'm going to pull in a very iconic Blade Runner shot. Sorry for the delay there. and and this hopefully we can sort of highlight some of the examples that we implemented. Okay, here we go. Alrighty. Oh, sorry about that. For some reason, it's not coming up. Let's just, for argument's sake, let's just focus on this frame because I'm going to be keeping you guys all day eating into your time. Okay, cool. So let's see what techniques are being used here. And I think let's start with, do we see any kind of repetition? I would say yes. There's a great example of repetition here, and we can see it over here with these structures as they go off into the distance, and that is highlighting again for us the depth as well as the echoing shapes, which is again an aesthetically pleasing way of looking at things. So definitely a great example of repetition there. Let's look at our rule of thirds. Do we have anything going on in our rule of thirds? So let's see. It's about a third here, about a third here, about a third here, about a third here. So we can see there's a nice point of interest intersecting on our rule of third there. Here, proximity of a city in the background, and then over here, not quite there, but close enough to our spinner to make that a point of interest. Here, not much, but nice textures and stuff going on. We also see the frame is kind of divided into 3 value points, so we have a really dark kind of value here in this section, and as it gets into this middle ground, it softens and gives us a different value, and as we get into the top third, we see it's a lot softer. So there you can see the rule of thirds being implemented to create depth again. Over here, on that same point, we see how this dust has completely sort of occupied the city area, and it's softened it and makes it feel very far away. In fact, I actually met the guys who had matte painted this, physically matte painted this. So this background, believe it or not, this section here is actually a painting on a wall, and this area here is your existing set. So here we can see how it softens and goes into the distance over there. Great example of that. I've covered the rule of thirds, covered creating depth. Symmetry, again, we can see our main character is directly in the middle there. So it's a nice sense of symmetry. We got a symmetrical feeling of that structure there as well as that structure there, which creates a nice balanced symmetrical image. Yeah, a little bit of a mound there, a little bit of a mound here. So again, we're looking at a very balanced and harmonious image. Then directional lines to control the eye. Yeah, so again, we can see that our protagonist is obviously, what is his intention? You know, his intention is to go somewhere, he's looking for something, so where might he be going? And by using these directional lines, we are implying that he might be going somewhere over here. So his spinner is pointing there. This line in the ground is creating a line to point there. These little shadows, little change of values, another one here, another one here. All of that you may think is happening by accident, but in fact, it is all conscientious storyboarding voodoo cinematic compositional voodoo that is gonna sell your frame and sell your story. And these are the techniques that are gonna help you. So this is a really nice example of how using directional lines um, in a frame can work very well, and how it's designed to puppeteer you, to control your eye of where you want to be. Harrison Ford is over here somewhere. So there he is, just waiting on him. Okay, cool. So I think that's a good example, at least, of using directional lines to control the eye. Highest point of contrast, very simple one. Let's have a look. It looks like this area here could be the highest point. So our eye will go there first. But something I didn't highlight is sometimes there's a flow of how the eye works. So even though this is the highest point and your eye is going to gravitate towards this area first, there's going to be a hierarchy of where your eye goes. So we're going to be looking at that, and then the first thing we're going to look at next is Mr. Gosling over here, which is also very high. He's also very contrasted against this area. Really dark jacket against really light sort of area there. So there's a hierarchy, and again, the eye is being controlled. It flows, even that little section there is making it flow across over here, right into that section. Bang! Maybe we start looking at this area afterwards, and then start looking at that area. So there's always a hierarchy of where you're going to look, and each frame, the cinematographer and director would be cognizant of how that image is going to read, how that image is going to present itself to you, and how you as the audience generally will interpret it. So yeah, okay. So I think that was a decent breakdown of this particular image, and I think, as I said, the assignment would be to take 10 shots of your choice and try and identify all those laws that I've just taught you, all those methods, and identify where it's being used. What I didn't touch on, sorry, was what lens. So, okay, so here we have a wide lens, as I said, and this would be a medium angle, which is, just putting us on the ground with him kind of thing. So, yeah, so that's where we're at with that one. And let me now jump into the next assignment, which would be pushing towards the end of my video. But hopefully this can be quite useful for you guys as well. So 1 second while I pull up this assignment. So assignment 2 would be to create 5 graphic studies of your favorite frames, staying cognizant of the choices made by the director and cinematographer. Once you've studied those frames, I would suggest or urge you to go off and do your own rough framing using the techniques that I've taught you, by choosing a genre, choosing a film, a type of film you like, and doing your own frames, and then coming up with a final storyboard. But for now, for the sake of this video, I'm going to show you how to analyze and break down a shot into a graphic thumbnail, and how to think when you're storyboarding, how to think in shapes, how to see the shapes, how to identify, and then all the while staying cognizant of all the laws being implemented. So let's start with that, and I'm going to use the same image to break that down for you. So here we go. So I'm just getting a canvas set up so I can show you what I'm doing. For now, I'm going to turn this into a black and white image because it's easier to understand an image in terms of its value and in terms of what it's trying to achieve when it's in black and white. Your color can be your final pass. Often with obviously color creates a mood as well, and in that particular tone we had sort of this orange color which was kind of like the somber mood, but you could change it to blue and you get an entirely different feeling. So color in itself has its own effects or psychological impacts, but I would say that that's something for a later stage, and for now we're just trying to focus on how the frame reads and where we want to look, and how the director and cinematographer is achieving that by using graphic shapes. So without further ado, let me start breaking this shot down. So as you can see, it is a very graphic image. If I do this in Photoshop, which is a threshold, you can actually get a stronger idea of how the image is reading. Let me just pop this out quickly. Properties. So as I do this, you can actually see where the shadow and the light is, and that's funny because now it looks like exactly like a storyboard. And this is kind of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to study to see where light and shadow is and how that controls our eye and how that makes us respond to the image. So let's start. So as you can see, there's a nice chunky shape that I referred to earlier over here. And we're just gonna start drawing in these shapes. And this is a really bold shape, and our eye is kind of gravitating towards that area. So, obviously I'm not trying to be too accurate with this. I just want to, the purpose of it is to study it, break down the values, break down how he's doing it so we know how the eye was controlled and how they use light and shadow to create a aesthetically pleasing frame. So here I'm just painting in very quickly, very roughly, the shapes that I'm seeing. As you can see, it's very angular, it's very crisp shapes, and this particular shape is standing against a very soft background, so that's also going to pop at you. There's a shadow underneath it. It's a little darker in the foreground, which is again another technique that's used by having a darker foreground. And as things go off, as I explained earlier, as things go off, they get softer and softer, and it creates a nice depth for us. So I'm just going to soften this, put this all in. And you can see, like, I'm not drawing any detail, but already you're starting to get the impact and the gist of the shot just by me blocking in these shapes. There's a rough shape of our hero standing. As I said, this doesn't need to be accurate. The landscape goes off into the distance here. And we have these softer shapes of these buildings in the back. This bridge is a little bit darker. This area here. Same with the other sort of bridge in this section. I mentioned earlier about that repetition, so we're looking at all those laws as well. A little bit more light splashing onto this top of the car here. Just got the angle of that a little bit wrong, but then we rectify it. Some shadow under this bridge, so we know the light's coming from the top. This shrouded area here is not getting any light, so it's going to be darker. I know some of this sounds a little bit abstract to you right now, but once you start implementing these studies and going over these laws, it will start to click. And the more you do, the more you'd understand it and the better you'd get at creating them. So I urge you to do as many thumbnail studies as possible, as well as breaking down all those things I mentioned, lens choices, compositional laws. Every time you look at a film, try and understand what techniques they were using to create these powerful images. So as you can see, it's starting to look like something already. I mean, that is all of 3-4 minutes in. just by identifying the shapes that I'm looking at, just by identifying where the light and the shadow is going, this would be something you could show a director, and you could say, this is my idea, this is where I want my hero to stand, this is where I think the hero should stand, this is where his car should be, this is where he's heading, and really just quick, not focusing on details. Details is what's gonna eat into your time, and generally when it comes to storyboarding, efficiency is more important, but at the same time, you don't want to be ambiguous, so you want to create strong, bold shapes that's gonna give you the idea of what you're looking at, without getting too stuck into the details. Get some of that detail down here, but not too much, as I said. So light coming through that door. And there we get an idea of his coat there. Some shadow areas in the foreground. And here it's softer. See some of the shapes of the buildings poking out. Some really nice shapes there. And yeah, just always think in geometry, always think in shape, don't think in detail, because it's the shapes that our brain sees first, and we can always look and admire the details later, but if the shapes don't tell us the story that we wanted to, then we're not going to have the image we want. And that's the first thing we see. Our brain interprets the graphic, not the detail aesthetics, you know. So always try and emphasize to try and see things in shape. Another easy, quick technique you could use that is a good way to identify shapes in an image is to take the frame and go into your filter. Let me just duplicate that. And go into your filter and create a cutout. And what that does is that simplifies the shape. Let's do that again. Let's get this image into the. There we go. So we go into cutout, and we take our levels into like a nice little higher level. And as you can see, it's simplifying the shot as well. You can see my values were a bit off, but they do look rather similar and tells the same story. And this is how to perceive it. You know, try and see things in shape and form and value. So that's my exercise on thumbnailing, on breaking down thumbnails. And so back to our assignments. I want you to do exactly what I just showed you. But in order to really let this settle into your brain, you have to kind of do it, sort of a lot, and really get those hours behind you. And with every practice you do, don't practice it without being mindful of what it is, the choices that have been made. So as I said, first assignment will be choosing 10 frames of your choice, identify the compositional laws, the angles, and the lens choice. The second assignment would be to create graphic breakdowns of your favorite films, which is what I did right now. Try and do at least 5, bonus if you can do 10. And then for the final and for the finale, choose your favorites film genre, example zombie apocalypse film, science fiction, whatever suits your fancy. It can be a period drama, and try and create your own story and your own thumbnails using the techniques that I've just relayed. And once you do 10 of those, choose your favorite one, the one that you feel reads the best, has the best compositional law arrangement and configuration. And once you've done that, do a nice final storyboard. And hopefully by the end of this, all this information, I know, sorry, it was a bit informal, a bit glitchy at times, and ran into a couple of hiccups here and there. But the intention is to get this information, which I've learned over the years, which I've implemented in the industry, and there are very effective techniques that is sort of universal to filmmakers. And I really hope that this was an informative video and it helped you guys. And hopefully my voice wasn't too monotonous and I didn't sedate you and put you to sleep. But thank you for your time, and good luck with your thumbnailing, good luck with your sketching, good luck with your final storyboard, and have fun with it. And it is an exciting skill set. And hopefully we can do another video focusing on some other things, maybe mood and color, and maybe some drawing techniques. But yeah, have a good day, guys. Thank you for your time. Hopefully it's educational. Enjoy. We'll chat again. Bye bye.